I'm freezing. Let me in. I beg. I'll reward you. The promises of the poor Apache woman. The wind moved like a memory that evening, slow, mournful, and cold enough to peel bark from the bones of old trees. A frost had settled across the plains, dusting the earth in pale silver. The sky held no sun, only a hush of fading blue that blurred into night. Inside, a weathered wooden cabin stood Clayton Reeves, 47, a man too used to silence. He wore a wool coat with a fraying collar, and boots that had outlasted the hands that stitched them. His ranch was modest, fenced with splintered posts, cradled between two lifeless cottonwoods. No cattle left, no children's laughter, just the groan of wood settling with age and regret. Clayton was not cruel, but he had learned to live with his doors locked and his stories buried. His wife, Mary, had died 11 winters ago. Since then, he spoke only when necessary, and to no one in particular. That night he was ladling stew into a chipped bowl when he heard it. 3 knocks. Then silence. He stood still, spoon hovering mid-air. No one came this far west without reason, not in this cold, not at this hour. Another knock. Lighter, slower, a final tap that felt more like pleas than demand. He opened the door. There, framed by the last grey blush of twilight and flurries of snow, stood a woman no older than 30. Her skin was darkened by sun and wind, her long black hair tangled with frost, the ends braided loosely and trembling. She wore a thin, woven shawl, soaked and stiff from cold. Her hands, bare and red, clutched a bundle of cloth tight against her chest. No shoes. No words at first. Then, in a voice cracked with windburn and desperation, she said, "I'm freezing. Let me in, I beg." She looked him in the eyes. "I'll reward you. I swear it. The promises of the poor Apache woman still hold weight." Clayton didn't move, not because he meant to be cruel, but because the moment had frozen everything inside him. His fingers, his thoughts, his grief. Something in her tone, ancient, unshaken, cut through the years like a nail through pine. She was shivering, but not pleading. Her pride stood taller than her frame. He stepped aside. Without a word, she crossed the threshold. The snow melted behind her as she walked, wetting the floorboards like a silent offering. Her eyes never left the fire. Clayton closed the door behind her, and the world somehow held its breath. The fire crackled gently, offering its warmth like an old friend. The woman sat close to it, legs folded beneath her, her shawl unwrapped now and hanging loosely from her shoulders. Beneath it, a worn calico dress clung to her frame, damp and thin. Her bare feet rested on a rag rug, pink and cracked from the cold, yet she made no sound of complaint. Clayton watched her from the table. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. He brought the bowl of stew over, placing it beside her without ceremony. A spoon followed, then a thick, woolen blanket he'd kept in a cedar chest since Mary died. He draped it gently over her shoulders. She didn't flinch. She looked up, just for a second, and their eyes met. Hers were dark, hollow, but strong, like someone who had forgotten how to cry, but remembered how to survive. She gave the smallest nod, the kind you give to someone who has not saved your life, but honored it. Clayton returned to his chair, lifted his coffee mug, and said nothing. The silence between them was wide but not cold. It had shape, weight, meaning. She ate slowly, not like someone starved, but like someone remembering how to chew without rushing. Only once did she pause, when her left sleeve slipped a little and revealed a faded bruise along her forearm, yellowed with time but still deep beneath the skin. She saw Clayton glance. She pulled the sleeve back down gently. No words passed, only the sound of wood hissing in the stove. Later, she fell asleep in the armchair closest to the fire, the blanket drawn over her like moss on stone. Her head leaned slightly to the side, and one of her braids rested across her collarbone like a bookmark in a forgotten story. Clayton didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, pipe unlit, watching the snow fall sideways across the ranch yard. No neighbors came by anymore, not since he stopped answering church calls or county meetings. There was no one to tell, no one who'd care. And even if they knew, who would have opened their door to a stranger like her? He didn't know her name, didn't ask. Something told him she wasn't ready to say it. The next morning, before sunrise, he brought her a tin cup of warm milk and an old pair of wool socks. She thanked him with a look and pulled them on. her fingers trembling only a little now. He pointed toward the back room. "Bed's warmer than that chair." She hesitated, then stood and walked slowly toward the room Mary once slept in. Her feet padded lightly on the old wooden floor. Before she disappeared behind the curtain, she turned and looked at him again. Still no words, but something passed between them, like an agreement made without ink. He would not tell anyone, and she would not vanish in the night. The snow didn't let up for days. It fell like silence, steady, unchanging, and thick enough to trap the world in place. The ranch became an island of smoke and frost, disconnected from the rest of the county. Clayton didn't mind. He was used to being forgotten. She stayed. She cleaned the soot from the fireplace with careful hands. She folded the blankets with reverence, and though she barely spoke, she began to hum at dusk, low, mournful melodies that didn't belong to English words, the kind that sounded older than snow, older than even the wooden beams above them. On the fourth morning, Clayton returned from checking the fence to find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a small beaded pouch resting in her palm. He set his gloves down quietly. "That yours?" She nodded. Her fingers, brown and calloused, traced the worn string at the top. "It was my sister's," she said softly. "She was 12 when they took her." Clayton didn't ask who they were. She didn't need him to. "My uncle had a farm by the river," she continued. "After my father died, we moved there. White man promised protection, but when sickness came, he traded us." Clayton sat slowly. She didn't cry, but her voice dropped to a whisper. "He gave the men our names, our tents, the horses, said he had no choice, said we were just mouths to feed. I was 15. They kept me longer." A long silence. Clayton looked down at his hands, scarred from fence work, calloused from winters, but useless now. No hands could undo what had already been written in her skin. She pushed the pouch across the table toward him. "She made this the day before they came, for me." Her voice was steady, too steady. "I never gave her anything." Clayton didn't touch it. He let it sit there between them, a fragile artifact that belonged more to the land than to either of them. That afternoon, the snow cleared just enough for one figure to appear at the edge of the field, a tall man in a tan duster coat and wide-brimmed hat. He stood still near the fence, staring at the cabin like a man remembering a crime. The woman saw him through the window and froze. Her hand gripped the table, not in fear, in recognition. Clayton stepped to the door, but she stopped him with a shake of her head. "I know him," she said. "He followed me from the border. Says he's owed something." "Who is he?" She looked away. "A merchant. My uncle's debt paid in my silence." Clayton didn't open the door. He didn't walk outside. Instead, he lit the stove again, louder this time, and drew the curtain over the window. "He'll leave when he's cold enough." She sat back down, her hands trembling slightly. "You don't want to know the rest?" Clayton poured her more coffee. "Already know enough." For the first time since she arrived, she smiled, a small, tired smile. And somewhere outside, the man in the duster waited, and then walked away. The snow melted slow that week, curling back from the earth like a secret no longer whispered. The plains returned in patches, dirt, stone, broken fence posts, until the world outside the cabin no longer looked dead, just silent. Inside, the woman moved differently now. She swept the floors, lit candles at dusk. She even carved something quietly in the evenings, sitting near the fire with her fingers working a small block of driftwood she'd found near the barn. Her name, Clayton learned, was Eloise. Not the name she was born with, she said, but the one she chose when she walked away from everything else. She never asked how long she could stay, and he never offered a date for her to leave. But the world was waking. First, it was Ben Harlow, an old ranch hand from 3 miles east, who stopped by for wire cutters. His eyes flicked toward Eloise as she stood in the corner, drying her hands. He didn't speak to her, just nodded at Clayton too long and left quicker than he came. Then it was Maggie Clare, the widow who ran the post depot. She came by on a wagon and lingered at the gate when she saw a shadow behind the curtain. "You've got company now, Reeves?" she asked, squinting. Clayton only said, "Cold weather brings strange winds." She didn't reply, just stared at the chimney smoke, then turned her mule cart and vanished. Even the land seemed aware. A hawk circled low every morning. Coyotes cried earlier than usual. The wind, once sharp and careless, now felt like it moved slower around the cabin, as if not to disturb what lived inside. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Eloise finally asked, "They'll come, won't they?" Clayton stirred his tea. "Some already have. They'll want to know why." He looked at her, then at the carving in her lap. It was a horse, small, delicate, rough-edged, but proud. She had carved a symbol into its side, something tribal, something sacred. "Let them wonder," he said. But both knew the wondering wouldn't stay quiet long. 2 days later, a group of riders appeared on the horizon. 3 men and a woman, their silhouettes tall against the setting sun. They stopped short of the house, tying their horses to the far fence. They didn't knock. They didn't shout. They just stood there, watching. Eloise saw them through the window and closed her eyes. "Those are her people," she whispered. "My sister's tribe. They sent them to see if I'm still Apache." Clayton didn't ask what that meant. He only asked, "Do you want to speak with them?" Eloise stood, walked to the door, then stopped. "Not tonight." She lit a second candle instead, placed it on the windowsill. A gesture, not of fear, but presence. The 4 watchers stayed until night swallowed them. Then they left, leaving no words behind. But in their silence something had shifted. Not confrontation, not permission, just recognition. The world, it seemed, was listening now, and waiting to see what they would choose. It happened quietly, like most important things do. The fire was down to embers that night. The wind had softened. Outside, the last ice clung to the eaves like a memory trying to hold on. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp and the orange glow of coals. Eloise sat at the edge of the bed, holding the carved wooden horse in both hands. Her fingers trembled, but she wasn't cold. Clayton sat across from her, sipping the last of the evening coffee, watching the way her shoulders hunched slightly, like she was preparing for a blow. "Can I tell you something?" she asked, barely audible. He nodded. She took a long breath. "I lied to you." He didn't speak. "I told you my uncle sold us. That much is true." Her voice cracked now like thawing wood. "But what I didn't tell you is I went back." Clayton set his mug down. "Years later, I went back. Not for him, for the house, for the chickens, for the scent of juniper trees. I thought maybe I could bury the memories if I stood where they happened." She looked up. Her eyes were wide, glistening, but dry. "He was dying, and I gave him water." Her hands shook as she placed the horse on the table between them. "I let him die peacefully, Clayton. I should have left him to choke on his sins, but I couldn't. I was weak." Clayton didn't move. He didn't say anything, just leaned forward slowly, gaze steady. "You weren't weak," he said at last, his voice low and rough. "You were the only one who remembered how to be human." Eloise blinked. Her jaw clenched, fighting something deep. She shook her head. "I hated myself for it. For months. I thought if I punished myself enough, the past would stay buried." Clayton's eyes softened. "Burying it didn't bring your sister back." "No," she whispered. "But carving this did." She tapped the wooden horse. "She loved them. She used to braid their manes in spring." She reached across the table and took Clayton's hand. For a moment, neither moved. "I didn't come here for shelter," she said. "I came because I saw the chimney smoke. I thought maybe, if someone still kept fire lit in a place like this, maybe they'd understand." Clayton closed his hand over hers. Then, slowly, he stood, walked to the mantel and lifted a small object, a delicate silver hair comb, dulled by time. "My wife's," he said. "I kept it too long." He placed it gently beside the wooden horse. 2 objects, side by side. 2 names not spoken, but honored. And in that moment, the past did not disappear. But it finally knelt. Spring came quietly that year, without thunder or bloom. Just a gradual warming, as if the land itself was healing slowly, like a wound closed without scar. The days grew longer. The river that once froze now flowed again in soft, muddy trickles past the edge of Clayton's fields. And Eloise had begun to pack. Not quickly, not secretively, just one item at a time. A shawl folded, a pouch tied, the wooden horse wrapped gently in cloth. She never said she was leaving, but everything about her movements said she wouldn't stay past the thaw. Clayton didn't stop her. He just watched, and wondered what the house would sound like again in silence. But it was the knock, sharp, clean, mid-morning, that broke whatever quiet farewell they were building. 3 times. Not the cold knock of desperation, not the angry one of confrontation. This was a knock of entitlement. When Clayton opened the door, the wind didn't come in, but a man did. Same tan duster coat, same wide-brimmed hat, the merchant. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a lawman, Deputy Starr Dull, one hand resting on the butt of a holstered pistol, though he made no move to use it. "I came to collect what's owed," the merchant said, stepping just inside, scanning the cabin like it was inventory. She ran. She made a promise, and that makes her mine. Clayton didn't flinch. "This ain't a place for ownership." "She signed a ledger," the merchant insisted. "Her body in trade for her brother's land. I have the record. I have the witnesses." Behind Clayton, Eloise stepped into view. She wasn't trembling this time. She walked past Clayton, slowly, until she stood in front of the man who once held her freedom like a coin. "I did," she said, steady. "But I was 17, and you lied. You said my brother was alive. He wasn't." The lawman looked up at that. "Is that true?" The merchant waved a hand. "Doesn't matter now. A deal is a deal." "No," Clayton said, voice low. "A lie is a lie, and you brought it here hoping no one would notice." Silence. Then the lawman spoke. "I can't arrest a man for lying," he said, "but I also can't let him walk out with a woman who hasn't been judged in any court." Eloise stepped forward. "Judge me now," she said. "Not with your laws, with your eyes." She took the wooden horse from her pouch. "This is what I made. This is what I kept. And this is the only promise I answer to." She handed it to the lawman. He turned it in his palm. The carved symbol on the side, the braid mark of her sister's tribe, was etched deep and deliberate. The lawman nodded once, then turned to the merchant. "We're done here." The merchant looked between them, realized no one was going to move, and left. No dust kicked up as he went, just the sound of his boots fading into the stillness. That night, no one spoke of it, but the people did change. The next day, Maggie Clare brought fresh bread to the porch. Ben Harlow sent over lumber without asking. The 4 riders returned briefly, not to confront, but to leave a woven basket of herbs and cedar leaves near the barn. Nothing loud, just truth being answered. By summer, the wind carried warmth instead of warning. The fields around Clayton's ranch began to grow again, soft grass pushing up through the thawed earth, wildflowers sneaking into the edges like they'd been waiting for permission. The sky, once a grey ceiling of silence, stretched wide and blue, and Eloise stayed. Not because she had to, because she chose to. She took to tending the garden that Mary once planted behind the cabin. Tomatoes, onions, corn. She added herbs from her own people. Things Clayton didn't know how to pronounce, but grew just the same. Some mornings she walked down to the river and came back with her hair braided in new ways, the beads clicking softly as she moved through the porch door. She never wore the thin shawl again. Instead, she stitched herself a new garment from wool and leather scraps, embroidered with symbols only she understood. The town stopped asking questions. Maggie Clare brought fabric and sewing thread once a month. Ben Harlow came by to repair the roof and stayed for coffee. And when the church bell rang on Sundays, no one blinked if Clayton and Eloise didn't appear. Some things were better prayed in silence. One day, Eloise brought out a small wooden box. Inside was the silver hair comb and the carved horse, now oiled and smooth from her touch. She placed them together, lined them with cloth, and sealed the lid. "This is for what was," she told Clayton, "not what is." He nodded. They buried the box beneath the cottonwood tree behind the barn. No grave marker, just soil and memory. Seasons passed. One winter morning, years later, a child came knocking at Maggie Clare's post depot. He had dark hair, clever eyes, and carried a wooden carving of a horse. Said his name was Joseph Reeves, and that his mother once told him the road into town was paved with mercy if you looked hard enough. He left the carving there. No name, no price, just the symbol, carved deep into the flank, a single braid. By then, no one in town questioned where he came from or who raised him. They just nodded, because sometimes a woman appears at your door, cold and desperate, with promises that sound too ancient to trust. And sometimes, keeping that promise doesn't bring you gold. It brings you peace. The world didn't need a war to change, just one man who kept his fire lit, and one woman brave enough to knock.